Before we start, we want to mention our sponsor for this video, Surfshark VPN, whose services helped us while researching this case. If you've ever wanted to access a website or movie only accessible in certain countries, use public Wi-Fi to access private information safely, or just see how browsing would look like in another location, Surfshark VPN will allow you to do just that. For us, we have used this to gain access to websites in the UK that we wouldn't otherwise be able to in Canada. This makes surfing the web a smoother and more streamlined process. Now all this sounds great, but what makes Surfshark different from other VPNs is the sheer number of features that come with the product. CleanWeb cleans any website of ads, trackers, and malware. The kill switch can shut off your internet if your data becomes vulnerable, and like the cherry on top, Surfshark protects an unlimited number of devices. Their lowest plan is just $3 a month for 2 years, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you don't like the service within the first month, you can get a full refund. What's even better is that if you use the code UNPRED, you can get an additional 3 months free, so there's no risk to try it out. Click on the link and use the code to get Surfshark today.
This is BBC Television from London. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris. She was taken to hospital in the early hours.
The death of Princess Diana was an international tragedy. On August 31st, 1997, the public had woken up to news that their beloved Princess Diana, lovingly dubbed as the People's Princess for her popularity and vulnerability with the public, had died in a violent car crash the night before. For a full week after the death, the event dominated headlines and grief swept over multiple continents. But among the overwhelming sorrow, questions started surfacing. What exactly caused the car crash? What were the circumstances of her death? And did the royal family have anything to do with it? But now, with security camera footage, police reports, and Diana's own words, we can unravel what exactly happened in the final chapter of Diana's life. Born in 1961 to the Spencer bloodline, Diana was the third of 4 children to her parents, John and Frances Spencer. As her parents were Viscounts, a title representing their status as a British noble, Diana was born with the title the Honourable Diana Spencer. But even at birth, Diana's parents were left somewhat disappointed, as after 2 girls and 1 newborn death, they'd wanted a boy, someone to carry on the earldom of Spencer, the family's hereditary title typically only passed down to men. It's partly because of this perceived disappointment that Diana doesn't remember her childhood fondly. In the first few years of her life, the marriage of Diana's parents was breaking down. Diana herself recalls, "It was a very unhappy childhood, always seeing my mother crying. Daddy never spoke to us about it. We never asked questions." It was only a few years later that the highly anticipated male heir was born, and a few years after that Diana's parents had gotten a divorce, an event that Diana later recalled as the biggest disruption in her childhood. Growing up in the park house of the Sandringham estate, Diana essentially lived on the royal family's property for much of her childhood, although she would really only see the royal family when they were on holidays or when they visited the park house, which wasn't very often. By the time Diana was ready for boarding school, she recalls feeling different or rejected from the other students. Although Diana liked school itself, she was known to be a bit of a troublemaker, one night running half a mile in the dark after curfew to get some treats, before being caught and almost getting herself expelled. In the following years, Diana would continue her schooling in various institutions, and by the time she turned 18, Diana, now referred to as Lady Diana, had grown more independent, wanting to spread her wings in something that was her own. And so, Diana moved into a flat in London where she stayed with 2 school friends. But because she didn't have much work experience, she ended up working a string of low-paying jobs, finding particular interest in working with children. Although, Diana wouldn't truly enter the spotlight until her relationship with Prince Charles. When the Prince and Diana first met in 1977, Charles was the 29-year-old heir apparent to the throne, meaning once his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, died, he was guaranteed next in line to the crown. Diana, on the other hand, was only 16 years old and described herself at the time as a fat, podgy, no-makeup, unsmart lady. In fact, at the time of their first meeting, Prince Charles was dating Diana's older sister, but over time, it seemed that the prince was warming up to Diana herself. Once they did begin dating in 1980, when Diana was 20, it took less than a year for the prince to propose, and upon saying yes and telling the prince how much in love with him she was, he responded, "Whatever in love means," the infamous phrase he repeated in a televised interview after their engagement announcement.
That she's been brave enough to take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Although, for the most part, things seem picture perfect, with the people instantly loving Diana for her shy nature and distinguished fashion sense. And now with the royal wedding on the horizon, the media honed in on the couple. This point in Diana's life, although exciting on the surface, was when things were slowly starting to fall apart. For one, before the wedding, Diana was put in Buckingham Palace by herself and was essentially isolated from Prince Charles, who always seemed to be busy with other duties. Also, since Diana essentially became a celebrity overnight, she effectively lost all privacy. For example, at the time, she was still learning how to drive, so every time she would try to practice, her car would be chased. Although, in the midst of this chaos, and unbeknownst to others, Diana was also suffering from bulimia, partly because of the history of eating disorders in her family, as well as the heightened stress and anxiety that came with her new life. Nevertheless, after many private and even public breakdowns, Diana reluctantly decided to go through with the marriage, and so, a few months later, in July 1981, the marriage became official, naming Diana the Princess of Wales. But as their relationship progressed, it quickly became clear that there was a problem. Even before the marriage, Diana knew about the other woman. Camilla Parker Bowles was a past lover of Prince Charles, but their relationship had supposedly ended long before Charles had met Diana. Despite the constant reassurance that nothing was going on, Diana couldn't help but notice how the two would always send each other gifts, call each other by their own nicknames, and how Camilla had seemingly endless advice on how to treat Charles. He even owned a pair of cufflinks with two C's intertwined, representing Charles and Camilla, but when confronted about it, he said it was just a gift between friends. Now, a whole video could be made about the marriage and how it went so wrong, so we won't go into too much detail, but some factors are important in the context of her death. For one, the marriage got off to a rough start, with Diana's bulimia getting worse, later saying that she threw up 4 times a day, and with Charles obsessed by Camilla totally. She recalls the pregnancy of William, the couple's first child, being a godsend and helping her occupy her mind. However, because of the pregnancy, her health was at an all-time low, and with no support from any staff and dismissal from Charles, this is when Diana says was her first suicide attempt. She recalls that, after an argument with Charles, she threw herself down the stairs and was found by the Queen, who was absolutely horrified. Fortunately, neither she nor the child were severely injured, and Diana later said, "I was just so desperate. I knew what was wrong with me, but nobody else around me understood me. It was a desperate cry for help. I'm not spoiled, I just needed time to adapt to my new position." Nevertheless, only 2 years later, Diana gave birth to the couple's second child, Harry. And as the Prince and Princess of Wales continued to do public visits, the couple, but more specifically Diana, would be met with crowds and crowds of photographers, as public interest had shifted more towards her than to Charles. In the following years of their marriage, both Diana and Charles would have affairs with different people, setting off their own respective scandals. The Dianagate scandal came after an intimate phone call between Diana and James Gilby, a childhood friend, was recorded and published. And Camillagate, another intimate phone call that happened a few days earlier between Charles and Camilla, that was also recorded and published. After this became public knowledge, the couple announced that they would separate, but not formally divorce.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
Although, the tipping point that sent the couple into divorce is widely believed to be the now famous interview that Diana had done with the BBC in 1995, where she details her relationship with Charles, among other things. Again, a whole video could be made about just this interview itself, but all we need to know is that it, among other factors, led to the couple's divorce a year later, in 1996. And so, amidst the mounting controversy and escalating turmoil of her personal life, the stage was set for the shocking and dramatic turn of events that would take place in the following year. In the days leading up to her death, Diana was facing some of the same problems she had been facing for years, and that was the paparazzi. At this point, Diana and Prince Charles had been divorced for almost a year, and had been separated for around 6. During this time, the press, as always, were watching her actions closely, ready to report on any and everything she did. That's why, when Diana accepted an invitation to spend time with an old friend in the summer of 1997, it became the focus of the media's attention. As photographers and the media were becoming incessant in the UK, Diana had wanted to take her sons to a more private and safe environment in the south of France, somewhere where they could enjoy a family vacation. This caught most by surprise, as the host, businessman Mohammed Al-Fayed, was seen as somewhat controversial in the UK for the bribing of politicians a few years earlier. Nevertheless, Diana joined the family on vacation in Saint-Tropez, but during the trip, some have speculated that Al-Fayed made sure his son, 42-year-old Dodi Fayed, became close with Diana, often encouraging the two to talk and mingle. Now, whether Dodi's father forced this relationship or not, the two became very close during this vacation, and in the months leading up to her death, this new relationship became the main focus of the media's attention. These couple months with Dodi in Saint-Tropez, and later on a yacht in the French and Italian Riviera, changed everything, and it's where some of Diana's most famous paparazzi photos were shot, including this iconic photo. But what really drew the attention of the British public was a series of photos taken of Dodi and Diana kissing on Al-Fayed's yacht. These photos were later published in the Sunday Mirror and sent shockwaves throughout the paparazzi and media, as photographers began to realize how much money could be made in covering the Princess of Wales's new and controversial relationship. After this vacation, media attention on the couple grew, with outlets and magazines commenting on everything from her clothes, her weight, and even a rumored pregnancy. As more and more tabloids started picking up the story of the Princess of Wales and Dodi, the Egyptian filmmaker, the paparazzi presence around the duo became incessant, reaching a fatal frenzy on August 31st, 1997. By the end of their vacation in late August, Dodi and Diana had made a final stop in Paris before heading back to London. Their private plane landed in a small airport on the outskirts of Paris at 3:20 p.m., with paparazzi already stationed at the airport to snap their photos as they left the plane. Upon leaving the airport, the princess and Dodi sat in one car driven by Dodi's regular chauffeur and were taken to Villa Windsor, a home owned by Dodi's father. After meeting up with two of their bodyguards, they then drove to the Ritz Hotel, another hotel owned by Dodi's father, where they would frequently stay during their short time in Paris. This is the first place we have security camera footage of the couple's whereabouts. The camera that you see here is pointed at one of the hotel's rear entrances, where Diana and Dodi enter the hotel for the first time, followed by their bodyguard. They are then escorted to an elevator where they stop at the first floor. During the security footage, you'll notice that the times on screen don't quite match up with each other. That's because the cameras in the hotel aren't all synced, although they're usually within 5 minutes of the real time. Anyway, the couple then walk into the Imperial Suite, a suite that's usually described as the crown jewel of the hotel, and starts at $45,000 a night. Around an hour later, Dodi leaves the Imperial Suite and goes to a nearby jewelry store, Rapazzi Jewelers, intending to pick up an engagement ring that he'd previously ordered. Now, many people that were close to Dodi, including his butler, have later stated that he was going to propose to Diana either the same or next day. However, many that were close to Diana, including Diana's older sister, many of her friends, and her butler, later said that she was clear that she did not want to get married, even saying to one of her friends over the phone, "I need marriage like I need a rash on my face." Nevertheless, around 7 minutes go by and Dodi doesn't actually leave the store with anything except a brochure. He asks the assistant president of the Ritz to grab the rings for him later. Dodi himself returns to the Imperial Suite. Around an hour later, Diana and Dodi finally leave the suite together and decide to go to Dodi's apartment, staying there for around 2.5 hours. Throughout their trips around Paris, their car, usually driven by the regular chauffeur Philippe Dorneau, were perpetually followed by paparazzi, but Dorneau, being an experienced driver, did his best to avoid them. Nevertheless, after a few hours at the apartment, Diana and Dodi left for a dinner reservation they had at Chez Benoit restaurant. But because of the paparazzi following them during the drive, the chauffeur was told by Dodi to change route and head to the Ritz Hotel instead, where they arrived through the main front entrance at around 9:50 p.m. But because of this change of plans, the staff at the Ritz Hotel weren't prepared for them, and when the couple showed up at the main entrance of the Ritz, there was dozens of paparazzi waiting. Upon their arrival at the Ritz, Diana and Dodi first attempted to dine at the hotel's restaurant, but chose to go up to their suite and dine there instead. After their dinner, Diana and Dodi left their suite at around 12:05 a.m. It was now Sunday, August 31st, 1997. Diana and Dodi wanted to spend the rest of the night at their nearby apartment, the same one they went to earlier in the day. With the crowds of paparazzi getting bigger and bigger as the couple was getting ready to leave, a decoy plan was put in place, supposedly by Doty himself. 2 decoy cars, driven by the couple's usual drivers, would be placed in the front of the hotel to distract the paparazzi, and a 3rd Mercedes would pick them up from the back exit, driven by a man named Henri Paul. Henri Paul, although the head of security at the Ritz, was not an accredited chauffeur. At around midnight, security footage shows Henri Paul leading the couple to the Mercedes, but not before photographers were already snapping photos of the couple. Doty and Diana were sat in the back, with Henri Paul driving and Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard hired by Doty's father to protect the couple, in the passenger seat. No one in the car was wearing a seatbelt. Once the paparazzi had determined that the princess had left the hotel from the rear exit, several paparazzi got in their cars and pursued the vehicle. It was now 12:20 a.m. and Henri Paul was starting the journey to the apartment. Henri drove along the predetermined route, straight on Rue Cambon, a right at Rue Rivoli, and then instead of going straight through the avenue of Champs-Élysées, where they would likely get stuck in traffic, Henri drove along the embankment route of the River Seine. This is what most professional drivers would do, but it was clear that while they were on this road, the paparazzi were hindering his ability to drive properly. Multiple witnesses of the Mercedes were interviewed after the crash. Most said that the Mercedes overtook them and was going very fast. One driver that was on the road recalls, "The car was clearly being chased by several, I would say between 4 and 6 motorcycles. I noticed that the vehicle, which continued traveling in the left-hand lane, was veering from side to side and having trouble keeping its line." A driver that was coming out of the Alma underpass just as the Mercedes was entering recalls, "What struck me was that it was swerving, or to be more precise, it was doing a wide zigzag. I could also see that it was at full throttle." Most professional drivers at this point would take the slip road here and head towards Avenue Marceau or George V, but Henri, for whatever reason, didn't, and headed straight towards the Alma underpass. Maybe the car was going too fast for him to take a slight right, or maybe the paparazzi vehicles were blocking him. Whatever the reason was, the Mercedes, now going around 104 kilometers an hour, made brushing contact with a white Fiat Uno, clipping its rear left bumper, then swerving to the right, then the left, where it crashed directly with the 13th pillar of the Alma underpass. The white Fiat Uno drove past the crash, and neither the vehicle nor the driver have ever been identified. The front of the car was remarkably mangled as the tunnel started filling with smoke. Henri Paul had been pushed against the steering wheel, sounding the horn of the car. At the time of the accident, the first confirmed people to arrive at the scene were multiple paparazzi, as they started taking photos, with some riding away before the police arrived. The first person to give medical aid to the passengers was an off-duty doctor that happened to be riding in the opposite direction when the crash took place. He almost immediately arrived on the scene to find the 4 occupants of the vehicle in varying states of injury. It was clear to him that the driver, Henri Paul, and Doty Fayed were dead, but the princess, as well as Trevor Rees-Jones, were both still alive but just barely conscious. He says he heard the princess groaning before calling the Paris fire service. Around 7 minutes later, at 12:30 a.m., the first of the emergency response team arrived, with multiple other police cars and ambulances arriving in short succession. The doctors who tended to the princess on the scene all recall slightly different things, but generally noted that the princess kept saying, "My God," and was moving her head from side to side, looking at what was around her. With the arrival of police, 7 of the paparazzi at the scene were arrested and had their film rolls and cell phones with which they were taking photos confiscated. Despite the medical team's best efforts to stabilize her, immediately after her removal from the vehicle, the princess fell into cardiac arrest, for which she received emergency CPR to restart her heart. Due to the instability of the princess's heart rate and blood pressure, it was not deemed safe to transport her by ambulance from the site of the crash to the hospital. That is, until 1:41 a.m. when Diana's blood pressure finally stabilized, and she began the journey to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, where she arrived at 2:06 a.m. It's important to mention that this hospital was not the closest one to the crash site, and many have stated that the decision to take her to a further hospital was an effort to make sure she didn't survive, but we'll get to that later. Trevor Rees-Jones was then also taken to the same hospital, which took a little longer as he was trapped in the car and could only be removed after authorities cut the roof of the Mercedes off. After arriving at the hospital, it was clear that the princess's injuries were imminently life-threatening. By this point, she was completely unconscious and couldn't breathe on her own. Multiple x-rays were immediately done, showing that the princess was suffering from severe internal bleeding, and while medical staff were trying to find the cause of the bleeding and perform multiple medical procedures to try and stop it, the princess went back into cardiac arrest. But this time, she couldn't be brought back. She was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. Later investigations stated that no other course of action could have been taken by the medical staff to keep her alive. In the hours following her death, external analyses were conducted on the princess to confirm that there was no suspicious circumstances related to her injuries. The pathologist doing the examination concluded that the princess's injuries were consistent with a road traffic collision. And so, her body was partially embalmed while still in Paris. Later that day, both her body and the body of Dodi al-Fayed were returned to England for a proper burial. The sudden news of the death of the Princess of Wales came as a shock to the nation and those around the world. As a much-beloved figure, affectionately coined the People's Princess, a premature and violent death only a year after her official divorce raised concerns and questions from both the public and those close to the incident. It was no secret that Diana was shaking things up within the establishment, as the kind of princess the crown had rarely seen, let alone approved of. For years, she was an outcast from the royal family, a known troublemaker causing discord within the monarchy, and at her death, some began wondering whether this was the perfect way for the establishment to get rid of her. Not to mention, at the time of her death, the mother of the future King of England was dating an Egyptian Muslim man, with some even speculating that they had plans to marry, something that was historically out of the question for a member so close to the royal family. This theory of cover-up and conspiracy had many supporters, the main and most vocal of them being a man who'd faced personal loss in the incident himself, Muhammad al-Fayed, father of Dodi. He claimed that Dodi had plans to marry Diana, even going as far as having a ring made at the Rapazzi jewelers in Paris the night of his death, and that there was even a possibility that Diana was pregnant, but due to the crown's disapproval of a non-white Egyptian Muslim stepfather for the future King of England, they had to rid both Diana and Dodi from the public sphere in a staged car accident jointly put out by MI6.
Who would want them dead? And why would anyone want to kill them, Dodi and Diana?
Because they still don't accept that Dodi, my son, an Egyptian, a Muslim, can be the stepfather of the future king. It's not easy to know that your child being slaughtered, right, by bunch of gangsters whom they call themselves the British royal family.
Although seemingly far-fetched, these claims were not made without basis, as there were several very strange inconsistencies the night of the alleged murder. These inconsistencies, and others that came up after the death of the princess, gained so much traction that in 2004, Operation Paget was opened. This over 800-page report, released in 2006, was a years-long investigation by the Metropolitan Police Force into the claims of conspiracy brought up by Muhammad al-Fayed related to the crash. It's comprised of 16 chapters, each one detailing a new angle of the death that has been scrutinized by the public in its claims of conspiracy, with extensive interviews and investigations into each matter. The report starts with the original conspiracy claim made by Muhammad al-Fayed that we mentioned previously. Basically, that Prince Philip, the husband of the Queen, had collaborated with quote-unquote security services, assuming that he means the UK's MI6, to arrange the murder of Dodi al-Fayed and the Princess of Wales. The alleged motive was that the Princess of Wales was pregnant with Dodi al-Fayed's child, and there was soon to be an announcement for their engagement. It is suggested by Muhammad al-Fayed that the royal family could not accept that an Egyptian Muslim could eventually be the stepfather of the future King of England. He further alleges that there was a cover-up by the quote-unquote establishment to prevent the conspiracy and murders from coming to light. Now, to continue, and not make this an extremely long video, we'll go through and summarize the evidence that debunks or further proves the claims of conspiracy, as put forth in the Operation Paget report. So let's begin. According to some close to the princess, she had been fearing for her life for months prior to her death, and claims that implicated the establishment as the perpetrators in her riddance. One of the most popular quotes used by the media was found in a letter that Diana wrote to her butler, Paul Burrell, in October of 1995, where she states plainly, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car. brake failure and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry. A scathing accusation, no doubt, one that the investigators took to the highest level, even interviewing the future king himself, Diana's former husband, Prince Charles, with regards to the claim. But according to the investigation, there was apparently no grounds for her concerns. Operation Paget interviewed people close to Diana and asked them what they thought about the letter, to which most responses were either that they saw no reason why Diana would be afraid at that time, and that the letter itself was written in a different way than Diana's usual letters, suggesting that it might have been faked. This concerning letter came about at around the same time that the princess expressed concerns of tampering with her car's brakes, likely by someone from within the government or the establishment. This concern was recounted by her friend Simone Simmons in a letter she had apparently written to her, stating, "Dear Simone, as you know, the brakes of my car have been tampered with. If something does happen to me, it will be MI5 or MI6 who will have done it. Lots of love, Diana." But her concerns do not stop here. For months between 1995 to 1997, Diana explicitly voiced concerns multiple times regarding her fear that the establishment, MI6 or Prince Philip, were planning to get rid of her, most likely in an accident of some sort, repeating the same fear to multiple people many times. In one instance, she told her friend Robert Deverick after the infamous BBC Panorama interview, "After this, they are going to kill me. I am sure Prince Philip is involved with the security services. After this, they are going to get rid of me." In 1996, she told him, "They don't want to understand me. I'm a threat in their eyes. They are not going to kill me by poisoning me or in a big plane where others will get hurt. They will either do it when I am on a small plane, in a car when I am driving, or in a helicopter." It was made very clear through not only Diana's correspondences with others, but also in her personal conversations with those around her, that she held significant concerns of being murdered by the establishment for years before her death. And many found this not only concerning, but outright damning evidence that Diana, in her own words, knew the exact way they were planning to kill her, making the case for conspiracy all the more stronger. Even in the Operation Paget report, they recognize and acknowledge the overwhelming evidence that the princess was fearing for her life during this time, but also provided statements from many of Diana's friends, claiming that she'd never brought this up with them. In the end, their conclusions only stated that Operation Paget found no supporting evidence to show that there were any grounds for the princess's concerns, even though they were clearly held at the time by the Princess of Wales. Many have argued that one of the main causes, if not the cause, of Diana's death was the incessant and disruptive chase of the paparazzi. Her whole life, the princess had been seemingly tortured by reporters, photographers, and columnists, all desperate for even an ounce of insight into her life, and this was no different the night of her death. With the amount of money they could stand to make, and the standards set by the yacht kiss photos, paparazzi from all over the world were hungry for a shot of the new couple. As discussed earlier, the second Diana and Dodi landed in Paris, they were hounded by the paparazzi, even causing them to change and cancel plans as a result of them. In the moments before the crash, it was the paparazzi who supposedly forced them down the tunnel, and consequently, they were the first ones on the scene. Due to their heavy involvement in the hours leading up to her death, some question why the paparazzi were behaving the way they were, and who notified them of Diana and Dodi's whereabouts, all leading to the final question: did the paparazzi have malicious intent in their actions before the princess's death? Some theorize that the paparazzi were called in by a third party conspiring to cause harm to the princess, and therefore not only tipping off, but actively encouraging the paparazzi to be as intrusive as possible to force an accident like this one. Others suggest that due to the high number of paparazzi chasing the couple through Paris, it wouldn't be unlikely that someone with malicious intent was able to infiltrate the group during the frenzy. Someone who may have been paid by either the establishment or MI6 to ensure that the princess is eradicated in a way that could easily be covered up by an accident. In their report on this theory, Operation Paget set out to identify and question every paparazzi who was present at the Ritz Hotel when Diana and Dodi took their fatal last drive. As mentioned earlier, when the couple left the Ritz for the last time that night, they left through the rear exit with 2 decoy cars leaving from the front to steer the paparazzi away from the real car carrying the princess. Throughout the investigation and the various eyewitness reports and paparazzi testimonies gathered by the investigators, They found that although there were many motorcycles, cars, and scooters that followed the princess's car into the Alma underpass, the accident could not have been caused by any interference on their part, and although the first photographer's actions when they arrived on the scene, which included immediately snapping photos of the princess immediately after the accident, were immoral, they showed no evidence of interfering with attempts to save the princess. Throughout the entire investigation, one of the people who was scrutinized the most by police and media was Henri Paul. As the driver of the car that killed Diana, as well as the head of security at the Ritz, various claims had been made regarding his character, his motives, and his movements the night of the crash. Some, including Mohammed Al-Fayed himself, claimed that Henri was being paid by MI6 or the establishment to insert himself where he should not have been, in the driver's seat of the princess's car, and create a situation that would ultimately kill both her and her boyfriend Dodi. A bold claim, no doubt, and one that took up almost 240 pages of quotes and evidence in the Operation Paget document, making it the longest chapter in the entire report. With the sheer volume of evidence, it was an incredibly difficult task for investigators to analyze all the CCTV footage, witness statements, and various character testimonies that painted a picture of what really happened. But through it all, this is what we determined. As mentioned before, Henri Paul was the head of security at the Ritz Hotel, known by his friends and colleagues to be quiet and reserved, but good at his job, good enough to have a friendly and positive relationship with his higher-ups. As a single man, Paul lived alone and was able to spend his ample salary on his hobbies, one of which included airplanes and flying. All this to say, he was seen as an average man leading a normal life. The night of the crash, Henri had been working in his usual capacity at the Ritz Hotel until around 7 p.m., when his shift was meant to end. Throughout the day, he had been supporting with the coordination of getting the princess and Dodi safely to all their appointments, as they were very high-profile guests, and with the constant threat of paparazzi, his job was made even harder. Although, at 7 p.m., when he was meant to get off work, Henri left the hotel. Now here's where his movements get confusing. Between the hours of 7 to 10 p.m., throughout all the investigations made, no one has ever been able to confirm what exactly Henri Paul was doing in the 3 hours between when he left the Ritz Hotel and when he was called back. Nonetheless, at around 10 p.m., Henri Paul was called back to the hotel by hotel management, telling him that Diana and Dodi, who were originally meant to be dining at a new restaurant in Paris, had decided to return to the Ritz and dine there instead. The hotel, unfortunately, was not notified of this decision, so the princess's return to the Ritz came as a surprise to both the staff and the paparazzi, who immediately swarmed the vehicle while the security had to scramble to regain control. This is when Henri was called back to the Ritz to support with dealing with the situation. Upon his return, CCTV cameras can see that Henri Paul entered through the revolving doors at around 10:07 p.m., after which he greets 2 members of management at the hotel. The 3 then immediately head for the bar, where they order drinks. In the hours following, Henri is seen on CCTV cameras moving around the hotel, speaking to paparazzi, and having conversations with various hotel guests, staff, and bodyguards. Eventually, Henri is summoned up to the Imperial Suite along with the 2 bodyguards, Trevor Rhys-Jones and Kieran Wingfield. Here, they are told by Dodi of the decoy plan previously mentioned. According to the bodyguard statements, neither of them approved of this plan, as it was lacking multiple security measures. Firstly, Dodi was planning for the car to seat only himself, the princess, and a driver, but Rhys-Jones insisted that at least 1 bodyguard should be present with them. Secondly, according to the investigation, it was never confirmed who decided that the car driving Dodi and Diana should be driven by Henri Paul, someone who was not a licensed chauffeur. According to Operation Paget, this plan was put in place very hastily, and in the end resulted in fatal consequences. While being chased by paparazzi through the Alma Tunnel, Henri Paul, going around 104 kilometers an hour, crashed into the 13th pillar of the Alma underpass, killing himself and Dodi Fayed at the scene, and severely injuring the princess and her bodyguard, Rhys-Jones. Upon the autopsy following his death, he was found to have a blood alcohol level over 3 times the legal limit in France. Now at the time, the cause of the crash was speculated to have been the result of Henri Paul's intoxication, as well as his high speed going through the tunnel, but Mohammed Al-Fayed disputed that, stating that the narrative that he was drunk was one made by the media to create an alternative explanation to the crash. Henri's alleged drunkenness was meant to cover up the fact that he was paid by MI6 to crash the car purposely and kill the occupants. The evidence for this claim was disputed and investigated heavily throughout the inquest, but overall supported by the fact that neither the bodyguards nor anyone around Henry that night thought that he was intoxicated. Both Trevor Rees-Jones and Kieran Wingfield insist that they had no idea that Henry had been drinking, with Kieran Wingfield even stating that, "When we were waiting outside the suite, Henry Paul did come up just before we left. Again, he wasn't drunk. There was no slurring of his words, and when he walked up the corridor, he wasn't falling around. He was quite tactile. He would touch your arm when he was talking to you, and he stood very close to me. I don't smoke and neither does Trevor, and I was close enough to smell cigars on him, but not drink." But the claim was not just supported by the bodyguards, but CCTV as well. Among the hours of CCTV footage caught by the cameras in the Ritz, one moment stood out in particular. At 23:12, Henry Paul bends down and ties his shoelaces. It takes a total of 44 seconds. Among the hours of footage, these few seconds caught investigators' attention, as a man who was apparently heavily intoxicated and 3 times over the legal driving limit was able to tie both his shoes with no issue, further supporting, in the eyes of the theorists, the case for conspiracy. Now, the inquest's decision that Henry Paul was intoxicated was not made without evidence, as we have receipts and CCTV footage that show that he went to the bar at the Ritz and ordered drinks, specifically 2 glasses of Ricard, as bartenders recall serving him these drinks. These statements were also corroborated with the blood taken from Henry Paul's autopsy that showed that he had high levels of alcohol in his blood, indicating not only that he'd been drinking at the hotel bar, but also that he'd likely been drinking while he was off work between the hours of 7 to 10 p.m. Although, Mohammed Ofaid's rebuttal of this evidence actually comes from various doctors, most notably from a professor of forensic medicine in the University of Glasgow, who stated that the procedures followed to pull blood from Henry Paul's body during the post-mortem analysis was not done up to normal standards, including the identification of the sample, and could have resulted in testing a sample that did not belong to Henry Paul. Even in its report, Operation Paget states that there were clear problems with the procedures used to take and identify Henry's blood, but apart from these issues, there was no clear evidence of conspiracy. Although, this leads us to another mystery surrounding Henry Paul. At the time of the crash, Henry's body was found with around 12,560 francs, around 2,000 USD at the time. Now this, although not a wedge of money, as Henry's best friend put it, is still a significant amount of money for a person to be carrying on them. What's stranger is that throughout the investigation, in tracking Henry's movements, the origin of this money was never found. It was not pulled from his bank account, and no one could recall who gave it to him. Some speculated that since he was a security officer at a very high-end hotel, he could have received it from a client as a tip, as he was known to have received tips up to £500. Although, 12,560 francs is no light tip, and one could question what he had done for that money. Was this a payment from MI6 for the job he was about to do? This theory is further fleshed out by the analysis of Henry's bank accounts. During the investigation, Operation Paget was able to access Henry's bank accounts, all 15 of them. Throughout these 15 bank accounts, he was found to have had around £170,000, the equivalent of around 275,000 USD at the time. Now this was a significant amount of money, and in analyzing his transactions, they found a few things that did not quite add up. Apart from regular deposits made from his paycheck and the manual transfer of money between checkings and savings accounts, there was around £43,000 that was deposited in the last 8 months of his life that couldn't be accounted for. These deposits could not be traced to any of his usual paychecks, and none of his friends or coworkers could explain the sum of money. According to those advocating for conspiracy, this money must have come from MI6, or an intelligence agency plotting the murder of the Princess of Wales. Sure enough, during Operation Paget's investigation of this claim, Henry Paul did have some connection to intelligence agencies. As a result of his head of security role at a high-end hotel where diplomats and elites stay, he was often contacted by various security agencies to ensure the correct arrangements were made. Now, most of the evidence supporting the claim that Henry was connected to intelligence agencies came from a former MI6 agent, Richard Tomlinson, who claims that Henry was in fact an agent for MI6. From my time in MI6, I still feel that the circumstantial evidence around Henry Paul very strongly suggests that he had links to the intelligence services of some nationality, although I am unable to say for sure which one. Although, his statements have been heavily disputed, and in Operation Paget's own investigation into the MI6 records, no mention of Henry Paul was ever made. In fact, it wasn't just MI6, but another French intelligence agency known as the DST who had contact with Henri Paul, saying in an official statement that they had tasked him with inquiries in hotel circles. Although the DST has confirmed that they were not in contact with Henri Paul the night of August 30th, 1997, and none of their interactions with him involved anything regarding the princess. Operation Paget's final decision on the matter was that there was no solid evidence that Henri Paul had any connection to MI6, and in his connection to the DST, there is no evidence that he was providing any information regarding the princess. One of the very first conspiracies pertaining to the post-accident treatment of the princess came right after the accident itself, and revolved around the medical team's decision to administer first aid at the scene rather than immediately take her to the hospital. Once she did arrive at a hospital, around an hour and 45 minutes later, it was the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, a facility that was not the nearest hospital to the scene. Mohammed Al-Fayed and other theorists state that these actions were taken specifically to decrease the princess's likelihood of surviving. To respond to these claims, Operation Paget interviewed not only the paramedics at the scene, but multiple hospital staff to determine why these decisions were made. Firstly, as mentioned earlier, the princess was treated at the scene by the paramedics who were called. The leading doctor in charge of this team took account of her injuries, which included trauma to multiple parts of her body as well as internal bleeding. The doctor treating her injuries on the scene stated that he made the professional decision to treat her at the scene rather than immediately transfer her to hospital due to the instability of the princess's blood pressure, which would likely cause her to experience cardiac arrest if she was in a vehicle traveling too fast. As a result, once her blood pressure stabilized, Diana was transferred to the ambulance and taken to hospital. The ambulance was directed to drive slowly at the request of the doctor to avoid further cardiac arrest. The decision to take the princess to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital instead of the closer Hôtel-Dieu Hospital was made by the lead doctor handling Diana's treatment, who decided that Hôtel-Dieu did not have the proper equipment to deal with the princess's level of injuries. On the other hand, he knew that Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital had not only the best trained staff to handle the multiple injuries that Diana sustained, but also knew that one of his colleagues, an expert in treating these complex injuries, was on duty at the hospital that night. As a result of these factors, the lead doctor used his professional expertise to make the decision to take the princess to the further yet better equipped hospital, and therefore the decision was not a result of malicious or ulterior motives. Now, in the minutes to hours after the princess's death, everyone involved in the incident now had to deal with the daunting task of not only notifying those who needed to know, but properly handling the body of the Princess of Wales. In this struggle, one of the biggest questions that arose later on was the seemingly rash decision to partially embalm the princess's body. In the hour after her death, French doctors had already completed an external evaluation of Diana's body, determining that her injuries were consistent with those of a road traffic accident, and therefore had no reason to suspect any other cause of death. After this conclusion was made, Diana's body sat in a hot and gradually warming hospital room, where the next main concern for medical staff was slowing the decomposition of the body. Knowing the princess would likely be seen by members of the royal family, an expert suggested that starting the process of embalming would make the princess's body more presentable and less traumatizing for those who had to see it. Although, conspiracy theorists state that embalming the body was done at the guidance of MI6 as an effort to conceal Diana's alleged pregnancy. In the months prior to her death, various news outlets and tabloids had speculated that the princess was pregnant with Dodi's child, something that the establishment would never allow. Therefore, MI6 ordered the embalming to conceal it, as embalming fluid interferes with the validity of a pregnancy test. In reality, a pregnancy test was never done on the princess because there was no medical reason to, and no viable belief that she was indeed pregnant. The man put in charge of embalming the body also had all of the permissions required to do so, as the doctors had already completed their evaluations, and therefore the decision to embalm was a completely legal act. The very last point that adds to the claim for conspiracy is the suspicious handling of the princess's clothes after her death. According to the hospital, the clothes that Diana was wearing at the time of the crash were released to her butler, who signed for them when he came to the hospital and brought them back to Kensington Palace. Although, strangely, Diana's butler has no memory of signing or receiving these clothes, and his first memory of seeing them was in a bag in Kensington Palace. In its investigation, Operation Paget attributes this memory loss to the high stress and trauma her butler was experiencing that day. Although, it was not just the arrival of the clothes to Kensington Palace that was suspicious to theorists, but what was done to them after arrival. Upon receiving the clothes, the princess's butler burned the clothes that were on the princess the night of the crash. This decision was made after a discussion with Diana's friend, who advised the butler that the clothes would serve no purpose to anyone now, and the safest way to deal with this potential health hazard was to burn them. Although many found this strange, all Operation Paget has to say about this is that there is no concrete evidence that this act could have been a result of ulterior motives. Whether you believe that or not is your decision. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding this case, and one that has never been solved, revolves around a white Fiat Uno that was potentially involved in the crash that killed the princess. According to multiple eyewitness statements, at the time of the crash, there was a white two-door Fiat Uno that was traveling erratically through the Alma Tunnel, often swerving from side to side. This car was described to have been old and showed signs of long-time use. The driver was said to have been a white male, likely between the ages of 40 to 50, with a large dog with a bandana sitting in the car as well. According to both eyewitness statements as well as scratches on the body of the Mercedes car that the princess was driving in, this white Fiat Uno had made brushing contact with the princess's Mercedes, which could have contributed to the accident that killed her. Now, after Diana's death, the original investigation led by French police was tipped off of a paparazzi who was closely following Diana and Dodi's relationship, who also happened to own a white Fiat Uno. This man was James Andenson, a known photojournalist situated in the south of France. James was part of a group of journalists and paparazzi who were closely following the princess's new relationship, and was actually in Saint-Tropez at the time the Jonical pictures were taken. Although, what interested investigators most was his ownership of a white Fiat Uno that very closely matched the description of the one that was traveling through the Alma Tunnel at the time of the accident. During their initial investigation, the French police first interviewed James's family of his whereabouts on the night of the crash. Of the two people they interview in his family, his wife and 18-year-old son, his wife specifically strongly confirms that James was home with her the night of August 30th into the 31st, even providing times that she saw him. However, his son provides a slightly different account, claiming that his father was not home the night of August 30th and had likely left the house. Although, the investigation does concede that James's son was at his friend's house that night and arrived home late, when both his mother and father were already in bed, so he was unlikely to have seen his father before he went to sleep, leading him to believe that he was not home. Apart from his family, other paparazzi and colleagues were asked about his whereabouts, and most confirmed that he was not in Paris at the time, as he was not seen at the Ritz by anyone present, nor was he caught on any CCTV footage. Although, there was one colleague who did state that he was in Paris, and in her account of events, she claims that although she was not personally at the Ritz or at the tunnel at the time of the accident, James had apparently told her later on that he was indeed at the Ritz the night of the crash, and that he was apparently in possession of photos of the crash that would, quote, cause a real stir when they were published. This conversation had taken place during Christmas of 1997 at her home when he visited her to complete a photographic assignment. She stated that he seemed to be bragging about this and was looking to seek her father's help in writing a book regarding the death of the princess that would include the pictures in its publication. Upon hearing this recount of events and the story that James had supposedly told this colleague, the investigators of Operation Paget determined that although the witnesses seemed to be truthful and have no ulterior motives, there is much more overwhelming evidence that James was not in Paris at the time of the crash, and that this story that was told to them was likely a fabrication. Regardless of these eyewitness accounts, the investigators turned their eye to the Fiat Uno in James's possession. The car itself was said to have matched the description given by the witnesses at the scene, as it was the same color, make, and model, and matched the description of being old and heavily used. At the time of the crash, James's Fiat Uno was found to have over 300,000 kilometers of mileage on it. During the initial French investigation, French police thoroughly examined the car, and during this examination, they found that there were multiple parts of the car that were either repainted or replaced, specifically areas on the left side, where investigators determined was the likely point of contact this car must have had with the princess's Mercedes. Although this repainting and replacement is actually what led investigators to rule this car out from the one involved in the crash for a couple reasons. Firstly, the original paint on the car, Bianco 210, didn't match the paint scratch left on the Mercedes during the crash. Secondly, it was found out that the paint job done on the repainted parts of James's Fiat Uno were done well before the time of the accident, indicating that the paint job wasn't an attempt to hide anything on the vehicle. Both James's wife and son were also adamant that the white Fiat Uno belonging to James had been at the house the entire night of August 30th and could not have been in Paris at the time of the crash. Now you may be wondering, throughout the investigation, why is it that all of the witness testimonies come from James's wife and son? Why did James not testify in his own defense? The answer to this question, although simple, is the center point to another very troubling mystery. James died in a car fire on May 4th, 2000. His car was found in a remote and secluded forested area in the south of France, where his body was found burned in his car after an accelerant was poured over himself and his vehicle. His death was ruled as suicide. According to the investigation by French police at the time of his death, James had apparently discussed his suicidal thoughts with his friends and had even detailed that he would do it by setting himself on fire in his car. The reason for his suicidal ideation seemed to be unclear, as some friends remember him saying if anything happened to his family, he'd commit suicide, or if his wife ever left him, he'd commit suicide, or just plainly that he wanted to commit suicide. Some also stated that he was concerned about how he would fund his son's new and expensive career, but investigations into his bank accounts showed steady income and no indication of financial burden. Some, including Mohammed Al-Fayed himself, pointed to this very suspicious death as an indication of conspiracy, stating that the owner of the Fiat Uno, who was most likely there the moment the princess's car crashed, was murdered by MI6 to stop him from divulging what he saw and what he did. Although, throughout the police investigation and eyewitness statements, the only point of suspicion was a hole found in the left side of James's head at the time of his death, which was later determined to have been a result of the fire rather than any external factor. All of the eyewitness statements claim that he was alone in the car when he was driving on his way to the forest the night of his death, and there was no evidence of another vehicle or another person around when he died, definitively confirming his death to have been a suicide.
It is heartbreaking to lose such a human being, especially when she was only 36. This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine.
The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, came as a shock to Britain and the world. Whether it was her lifelong advocacy, from clearing landmines in Angola and breaking myths against those suffering from AIDS during the AIDS crisis, or her vulnerability about her life and struggles with mental health, love for Diana was cemented in the hearts of the people, and at her death, the millions she touched mourned her loss.
Because she was the princess of the people, and this is the worst news this country has heard for some time.
What do you mean by the princess of the people?
Well, she was for the people. People could relate to her as an individual and as part of the royal family, despite what had gone on in the past. She was the people's person.
In the days following her death, millions of people came to Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, and the Alma Tunnel in Paris to lay flowers to remember her. The volume of people coming out to remember the princess was so high that the palace had to ask mourners to stop leaving flowers, as the amount of bouquets left at Kensington Gardens had reached 5 feet deep in some areas. Her funeral a few days later became one of the most watched broadcasted events in history, with approximately 2.5 billion people who watched the funeral from around the world. Although, with such a high-profile death as Diana's, the royal family was not exempt from scrutiny during this time. After years of sentiments that the royal family was excluding and ostracizing the princess, the public had much to say about their handling of the funeral. Particularly, the fact that the Queen's public address regarding Diana's death came late, 5 days after the accident. Buckingham Palace was also fearful for Prince Charles, as his treatment of Diana had made him deeply unlikable to the British public. This was made worse by the fact that many criticized him for wearing a navy blue suit to her funeral rather than the traditional mourner's black. His reasoning for the decision was simple. Diana had always preferred him in blue. Diana's funeral also set an entirely new precedent when it came to the flag above Buckingham Palace, as it stood bare for days after Diana's death, unlike the many flags across England that had been lowered to half-mast. The reason the flagpole stood bare was because the Queen was not currently in residence at Buckingham Palace, and the royal standard could never be flown at half-mast because it was a symbol of the monarchy. But in the face of mounting public pressure, Buckingham Palace flew the British flag for the first time, lowering it half-mast at her funeral. The impact of her death on the public was also tangible and led to something Britain had rarely seen before, called the Diana effect, which led to a significant increase in the suicide rate, specifically among women of similar age to Diana, as well as an increase in people reaching out to mental health services for issues relating to grief and depression. In the week of her death and funeral, calls to police had dropped around 30%, with a 28% drop in public offenses. According to a poll done by The Guardian of over 1,000 people, almost a quarter of them voted that Princess Diana's death was the most significant event in British history in the last 100 years. The global impact of Princess Diana is an irreplaceable part of British history and has led to an entirely new and more modern take on a centuries-old monarchy. Her ability to completely revitalize the public view of the royal family made her a royal the world has never seen and is likely to never see again. Her influence has truly stood the test of time, and in the hearts of the millions who loved her, she will forever remain the people's princess.